So good morning, everyone. Sorry we're running a little bit late here. The good news is we still do have the full hour for the session. So if you didn't hear already, the sessions are being moved around a little bit so that you do 11:15 to 12:15 for this particular session. So I'm Dan Peterson. We have a fireside chat here just to chat about all things going on with Wave. I hope you liked our announcements in the keynote this morning. I think we'll start things off here, just introduce everybody on the panel, and then we'll be sort of switching between questions in Moderator as well as questions live. So I'm Dan Peterson, product manager on the Federation and API things, and well, Lars.
I'm Steph.
We have a few mics.
My name's Alan Green. I'm an engineer on Wave, working mostly on enterprise things.
Okay. My name is Pamela Fox, and I work on Google Wave API developer relations.
I'm Douwe. I'm the TL on our API team.
I'm Jochen Bekmann and work primarily on Federation.
So Lars, would you like to kick things off a little bit with rehashing some of the announcements in case people missed it?
Yes. First, I should just say thank you to all of you guys for all the amazing things you've built over the past years and all of the feedback we've gotten from you. That's been absolutely the best part of the last year.
Yeah.
Thank you. So just to rehash the new things we're announcing today, first and foremost, we're opening up Wave to everyone. So you no longer need an invitation to use Wave. This is true both for individuals and for organizations that use Google Apps. If you have a Google Apps domain, you can go and turn on Wave. I think we're rolling it out during the morning here, so it might not quite have hit your control panel yet, but it'll be there soon. And then with the API, we're rolling out a bunch of new things. For starters, we're starting with a system that means robots no longer have to live on App Engine. They can live anywhere on the web. We're adding media and attachment features to both our robot and media APIs. We're starting a new API. We call it the Wave Data API that is designed to let you build things like notifiers and even lightweight clients, in particular for mobile devices. And then we're adding a bunch of smaller things like a bunch of new hooks for your extensions to better integrate into our client. And then on the protocol track, we are open sourcing more of our production code today. Has it hit yet? Who's in charge of the hitting of?
Hasn't hit quite yet.
Some of it has been released and there's more coming.
Okay, the lines of code are trickling into the open source repository. So in particular, the editor in our client, which by far is the hardest part to write of a Wave client. We've open sourced that. We're in the process of open sourcing that today. I think, Jochen, you can nod if I'm telling the right thing here. We're in the open source repository. It's going to be wrapped in a very simple Wave client, which speaks the beginnings of a client-server protocol between this lightweight web client and our open source server called Fed1. And we're also putting out the beginnings of a white paper describing that protocol. The idea is, and this is one of the top requested features, that you guys will be able to build a web client from scratch using our open source code or not, that you can put on top of different Wave systems that speak this protocol, which of course will include ours. And so that's the news from today. The primary reason that we're opening up Wave now is that while when we started the invitation-only preview, it was clearly still, and we knew this, it was clearly still buggy, it was slow, it had a bunch of usability features, and what we've measured in the feedback from people actually using it over the past couple of months, more and more we hear people actually finding Wave make them more productive at work. And that's why we're opening up today. And in particular, the use cases where Wave really shines is for groups of people all adopting Wave at the same time and using Wave as a primary tool for coordinating the work, for collaborating on it, for writing their design documents, for tracking their tasks, for all those kinds of things. Let me just stop there and we'll take questions.
Yeah, maybe to kick things off live, how about we take a first question from the audience? There's a mic here in the middle. Or if there's nobody super eager, we can jump into the moderator because we are geeks and have been using Wave a lot. Grab the mic.
Nice t-shirt. Does it work? Yes, okay. We've just been looking at the new data APIs that you've sort of announced, and we've noticed at the moment that they're still locked down to the sandbox. What's the timescale that you're working on to release it to the main preview or labs?
The data sorry, data API? Was it?
The new data API that you've just released today, the inbox sort of access.
I'm pretty sure that works on.
Is that on preview as well as?
Do you mean do you mean the data API or the robot liberation?
The data API.
The data API should work on the main.
Yeah, so the data API is enabled on both the sandbox instance and the external instance.
I sincerely hope so.
Okay, okay, it's fine.
If it's not, it will be fixed quickly.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, so the Chrome, the new Chrome Notifier extension is actually using the Wave Data API, and you can use it with your Google Wave Preview account. I've been using it for the last 24 hours, and it's been riveting. So that kind of proves that. If there's a mistake in the docs, I might have written them a bit late last night, so we can take a look and check on that.
Hi, the editor that's been open source, do I need to use GWT to use that?
The new web client is based on uses GWT, yeah, so it's Java code we'll be releasing.
Hey, will there be some sort of federation liberation?
Federation is liberated. Could you elaborate, please?
So that we could federate with the real Wave accounts? I thought at least it was liberated only to the extent to the sandbox.
Okay, so yes, we don't have it on googlewave.com. We have it on wavesandbox.com. And yes, we hope there will be one. We don't have an exact timeline, but hopefully it'll be soon. Months.
So the thing with federating on Google Wave is it is something we really want to do soon. Unfortunately, there's a lot of work to be done at the model level because it's rather complicated if we were to be sort of changing the model after the fact of that port being open. And so it is something we want to address, but we also need to sort of keep iterating through the use cases of the model so that we can make sure there aren't going to be major changes after that point, or at least they're backwards compatible and can be graceful.
And the major problem with that is that all of the changes in waves are signed cryptographically. It's really hard to do migration with a distributed system where you can't ask different servers to migrate their data.
Hi, have you got plans for developing the Gadget API? There's so much ways working with Lex. For instance, accessing the parent iframe, parent window, having those cool name pages inside the gadget, and so on. So, what are your plans for updating Gadget API in Google Wave?
The Gadget API?
Yeah.
What would you like to see?
First, I would like to access the parent window scroll, because I'm now doing crazy hacks just to get the parent window scrolled. Like positioning text area and setting focus to it, so the browser can scroll. And now I implemented name pages on my own, but they are not so good, and it's an effort that is unneeded.
Yeah, we should totally do that.
What are your plans about it?
Yeah, we've heard that. There's definitely been a lot of people who are running into issues with gadgets when they have gadgets that take up like a large canvas, and there's scrolling involved and there's panning. And so the things we're looking into is stuff like letting gadgets full screen themselves, right? And also giving gadgets, more control over where the wave is. So I don't think we'd necessarily give you access to the parent because that's kind of dangerous, but we would give you like a method that says like, you need to scroll to this position now, right?
Is there any approximate schedule, when can we expect it? I don't know, next year, next month?
Months,
okay. And according to security issues, so as a user, I'm a bit scared that Gadget can make any request to any public server, so it can transfer any my personal information that Google Wave Gadget API, they provide a lot of information of me. So is there any ability for user to control what information can be transferred?
Yeah, so we have plans, and I'm afraid we have been saying that for too long to do something about that. Basically, there is this other project in Google that allows you to lock down JavaScript, and so we would would be starting using that for a subset of the gadget where this would be a concern. And for the other ones, we would, you know, do some sort of opt-in scheme.
Okay, thank you.
So that project is called Kaha. So if you want it, it's an open source project, so you can actually check it out. It's being used for various gadget things.
And what will be a response for me as a gadget developer? So for instance, now my gadget is gathering Google Wave IDs and storing in an external SQL server. What will be a response to my gadget if user decided to protect this information?
Well, you know, then you wouldn't be able to talk to your server anymore.
So I will be just able to make any AJAX requests to external servers?
Well, so we haven't really settled down on what exactly this API will be, but I think vaguely our plans are to sort of have a more open thing where you can do all kinds of things, but where you have to first get the permission from the user and have a lockdown API for where the user doesn't have to opt in, but that lets you build as a developer small controls that you know don't need to make these outside calls.
This third question I remember that actually why I need access I'm finishing. Why I need to access a third-party server? Just I need to store some information per user, not per blip, not per gadget, but per user. So is there plans for? I need storage per user.
Yes, we have actually silently probably then.
Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't do that. Okay, so we did launch a private gadget state API a few weeks ago. It's in the reference. So you can actually store information pertinent to the user, like maybe notes that the user has left in the gadget that's only for them, or personal preferences. So you can start using that for a few use cases.
Is it wave wide? So is it?
So no, that one, the private gadget state API is just per that gadget instance. So you're also asking about a wave wide thing.
I need to store some personal settings.
Yeah, so I think we'd look into a wave wide settings as well. Sure. Yeah, I mean, generally Wave has more work to do in the settings area, and once we see more settings for different parts of Wave, we can bring that into gadgets and robots as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I do want to make sure to jump into the moderator questions as well. So let's grab one from there. So is there a plan to add capability for Wave to allow contributions to Wave by non-Wave users through email or IM service when requested by a Wave user? Is there a plan to add capability for Wave users to allow contributions to Waves by non-Wave users through email or IM service?
Yeah, so we are working on a few more email things ourselves. So already you can get email notifications when a Wave change. We're just about to launch a feature where you can add an email address to a Wave as well, and then some content from the Wave will go out in an email with a link pointing back to that Wave. And sometime later, I'm not going to give any particular time frame, but sometime later we'll make it possible to reply to those emails and have your reply grafted into the Wave. I think it's already possible to have interactions in various ways between email and Wave written by extension developers. I saw someone wearing a Mr. Ray t-shirt here. You can check out extensions like that and maybe get inspired by that as well.
Mr. Ray actually lets people respond just by a statically rendered Wave that they get a link to in their email, and so they don't have to be Wave users at all. So I used it for communicating with some of my friends who didn't have Wave. So if you want to check that out, the Wave 2 people, they'll be at the Wave Sandbox tomorrow, and there you go, there he is, and they created Mr. Ray, so they have some ideas about what that looks like.
I just wanted to add, after our September 30th preview, we spent a lot of time talking to our users, surveying our users, doing usability studies, trying to figure out what people wanted from Wave. And the top 2 categories were we either want to see our Waves in Gmail or we want to manage our email in Wave. How many of you guys want that? Yeah. Woo! Which one? Both. So we want everyone to know that we'd be very happy to have your Waves wherever you want them. Like we saw the Buzz launch, and Buzz started out as a product integrated into Gmail, and we'd be very happy if Waves were inside of Gmail too, but it's a significant amount of engineering work, and we've been focused on the Waves experience itself and making Waves great. But there is Gmail Labs, and we're hoping that we can launch some cool labs that'll let us experiment with different ways to integrate into other Google products and see what users like and what sort of things they mean by integration.
Hi. Going back to the Gadget API, one other thing that would be very useful for us is the ability to have a gadget take the user to a different wave by its wave ID.
Yes.
Then, yeah, I mean, we're actually doing that now with an ugly URL hack that assumes the structure of the restored wave thing, but that doesn't seem like something we want to rely on long term.
No, but I'm aware, and we'll add this. This is, I think, we need to look at it in a wider thing to, the sort of window management sort of stuff that Gadget should have. But definitely.
Okay.
Once.
Nah, I think we're going to do weeks.
Yeah. Okay. And the other thing is, just now with Wave being open to everybody, does that mean that people's Wave addresses will now be gmail.com instead of Google Wave?
No, they're still at googlewave.com, but there's a one-to-one mapping. So if I'm Stephanie at gmail.com, I'm also Stephanie at googlewave.com. And so as of today, anyone can sign in with their existing Gmail account. They don't have to put an at googlewave.com extension on our sign-in page. So there's a one-to-one mapping with those accounts.
Okay. And when you add a participant to a Wave, you can actually type, it will work if you add at gmail.com. It will re-resolve it into at googlewave.com.
Okay, great. That was the main question. Okay, thank you.
So I have another question from Moderator. Is progress being made on the mobile front? Mobile.
Well, so I think the biggest progress is that these guys launching a data API that lets others build lightweight clients for mobile. We are a little bit behind with getting the full Wave client to work on mobile devices. You can see how far we are if you have a late model iPhone or a late model Android. Actually, try and go to wave.google.com and you'll see a thing saying we don't support it. Try clicking through and then you'll see exactly how far we are.
And once again, the Wave 2 developers created an Android app called Wave Up that lets you view waves in Android. Right now using the robot, but I expect you to port that to the data APIs tonight. So check it out tomorrow.
Live question? Yeah.
Hi guys, thanks for your time today. Two-parter. One is, could you talk a little bit about the platform strategy as it relates to other enterprise portals, like LifeRay, for example? And also, if you have any plans in terms of SSO integration support.
I'm sorry, your first question was about how...
So how, are there any plans, has there been any thought around how Wave services could be integrated with or might replace or compete with other enterprise portal platforms that are used for integrating systems in a portal-like fashion?
I would say no. We don't have any plans in that regard just yet. What was your second question?
And then the follow-on is are there any plans for single sign-on support, standards like CAS or SiteMinder or OpenID, potentially to be integrated so that users could use other credentials to get into the system?
I see. No, I don't think that's something we have plans for yet, is it? Jochen?
So what I would say is that the Federation protocol allows you to have your own solution and you extend it. As far as supporting OpenID, we have a very lightweight authentication mechanism that we currently use for the client that we will be releasing. However, anyone can take the code that is out there, bolt on some OpenID support, and you're ready to go. This is still early days. It's fairly experimental code. Hopefully, it'll grow into something that we'll be able to support this on a wider platform.
So there's nothing that would preclude somebody from using another authentication layer on top of Wave?
Would be fine.
Okay.
I mean, the server-to-server side has full support with certificates between domains, and it's up to the domain, the provider, to make sure that their users authenticate to their specifications. So OpenID, whatever is fine.
Thank you
so
very much.
Wait,
there's
one
more.
Dr. Wave. Ooh. If you've
hi.
watched his video.
I got Dr. Wave up there? That's awesome.
I know.
That's another guy. I've met him before. It's so you can actually do single sign-on using your Google Apps domain. You can set up single sign-on with that. Now, since Wave can be associated with your domain, you can therefore do it that way.
Okay.
If you're interested.
Great.
The other thing is, we have a talk tomorrow about Google Wave, and in the enterprise, we're going to be talking with Salesforce as well to show some of their integrations. But I think the other thing we're going to be talking about more is how you can use the new active API with robots to actually pull data from other systems into Wave to try to make it more of the kind of portal you were talking about.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Sure.
So there's a question from the moderator. Is there already a way for Wave users to embed their own moderator series in Waves like you did here?
We created a few special gadgets for the I/O waves, and one of those was a Google Moderator gadget. So right now the gadget is kind of specialized for I/O, has a few things hard-coded, but we're working on both open sourcing it and also sticking it in the gallery so other people can put moderator gadgets in their waves as an easy way to ask questions and sync it back to the moderator backend.
Will Gmail contextual gadgets work in Wave?
So I think that the set of gadget features involved there is slightly different, and so they won't. I don't think they'll work right out of the box. We should investigate that more.
Well, I'm pretty sure as Gadget it will work, but we don't have the pattern matching set up to do it. But you could probably.
I want to make sure we understood what you meant. Do you mean how when you have a UPS number or an address inside of a Gmail? Do you mean how when there's certain text we recognize in Gmail, we show kind of...
So
okay.
I can't quite tell if the question is if somebody were to build it for Gmail's content in one box, or if somebody were building it for Wave, which direction are you trying to go? Absolutely. But
right.
Right. Exactly.
So. So I think the basic idea of contextual gadgets, from the way I see it, is that it's recognizing something in your email and doing something smart with it. So this is something that robots can do today. You can actually, we just put the documentation out for regex hook, which means that if it recognizes a pattern, it'll give you a little light bulb and say, do you want to run this extension, right? Adds that extension, and then that extension does something with that bit of content, right? So that's a similar experience. There we're just triggering on regex hooks. But in the future, I would imagine getting to trigger on other kind of hooks, like we found an address or some other piece of data like that. And I think the development strategy is going to be different because we are two entirely different environments. But I think the user experience is fairly similar. It's just being smart about finding stuff in your content and giving the user something that they can do with it. Well, I'm sure we both use the Gadgets API, so,
so
that part, I think the part that's different is the non-gadget part, which is how you're actually doing the matching and adding it on and all of that.
At the base layer, it is the same Gadget API. It's just that there are different features involved and then the different sort of processing mechanisms.
I just want to stress all 8 of us are just off the plane from Sydney, and anyone who follows Wave know that we kind of work independently from the rest of Google, and that means sometimes we aren't on the bleeding edge of things that other product teams are doing, but we can definitely answer more details around this. We can learn more about the Gmail contextual stuff and put it in our developer help forum. Right, Pamela?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so we can put more detail there.
Hey, I've got a couple of questions. First of all, the sort of robot-to-robot interaction, is that coming? Are we going to see it anytime soon?
It's a little tricky.
Yeah.
So yeah, the question was robot-to-robot communication, and what are we going to do about that?
So right now, robots can't actually hear events from other robots.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's it's the intent behind it is to avoid ugly loops.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, obviously, yeah. Would it be possible to have like a maximum recursion depth or something to, so we can still communicate through the wave using robots, but obviously not get into an ugly loop.
Well, anything is possible, but it's somewhat tricky to solve. So we have to weigh it against other feature requests. If you make a lot of noise and build that Android app and stuff, then
Okay. Yeah. The second question is, now that you've sort of opened up the, more APIs to the inbox and sort of integrating more tightly with users, are we going to see the ability to be able to proxy for proper users? So I can send a message from a robot using my actual account into a wave.
You mean write access to the data API, or?
No. So with the robot at the moment, you've got the option to proxy for. So you can say I'm proxying for this user.
Yes.
But will it be possible to proxy for an actual wave user?
Well, so if you have the OAuth authentication stuff from the user, then your robot can just use that stuff to sign its outgoing request, and it will be proxying for that user.
Oh, brilliant! That's with the new API.
No, yeah. So that
yeah.
we'll get we're a little unsure whether we have when we'll have the ability for robots to write on behalf of a user, but that will be soon. Weeks.
Okay, thank you.
A common theme of weeks or months. Which is it? So let's grab a question from Moderator. Are there any plans for integrating Google Wave with more features from Docs? Sorry, there's a little bit of a URL escaping problem with our Moderator gadget, which is something we're working on.
Integrating with Docs?
Google Wave and Google Docs is sort of the question. Integration opportunities.
So I think you'll see fairly soon is just the ability to convert between the two products. Is the person who asked the question in the room?
No, this is from the Wave, so I'm not entirely sure.
They might still be in the room though. But I'm just wondering which particular feature the person is thinking about. Okay, they're not here.
Yeah, you can answer more elaborately. There's simple things and.
So basically, export sync, that's, weeks.
Export is weeks.
Yeah.
So we're working on exporting and printing waves, and that you'll see within weeks, including exporting over to Google Docs. They have better formatting features that Google Wave has, so if you're collaborating on content in Wave, you'll be able to export it over there, do better formatting for printing and so on.
Pamela, do you want to mention Ferry as well?
Yeah, then once again, there is an extension that you can use today to export and sync to Google Docs, and it just uses the Google Docs data API, let you authenticate and then save to there. I just used it this morning for exporting something to Docs, so I could do a little more formatting and print it out, in fact. So that's called Ferry, and you can find it in the extensions gallery.
I'm just going to ask Lars the tough question that I think was implicit in there, which is, a few weeks ago, Google Docs launched a really cool feature of live typing, similar to Wave. And are these products on a similar path? What's the future? Go.
Oh, no, that's much better. Tough questions. Yeah, so we actually work really closely with the Docs team to make the live typing work over in Docs. The two products still have quite a different focus, right? So in Wave is a place that you'll use to coordinate all of your work. It's much more about communication and collaboration in a single space, whereas the Docs team focuses mostly on being able to produce high fidelity documents for printing, for exporting and importing to and from other document formats like Works and PDF and so on. The question of how tightly we should integrate the two products in the future is something that we're starting to talk to them about. I think, and this is the way Google operates in general, really want to hear from you guys, just like we were asking you earlier whether waves should live inside Gmail. And you could imagine that over time, all of those formatting features are available inside of Google Wave, or maybe the other way around, that all of the communication features of Wave are inside Google Docs. We really, truly don't know yet. So if you have opinions, don't be shy to share them with us.
So the next question is an interesting one. What are the Google Wave team's thoughts on long-term archive issues of waves? I'm concerned that a wave using gadgets heavily will become unintelligible a few years down the line when the gadget provider goes bust or there's an incompatibility issue.
So this is actually something that a lot of businesses bring up with us as well, making sure their sort of data sticks around. Some of the things we are doing, eventually you will be able to export to other formats, such as PDF, et cetera. So we've looked into being able to do appropriate renderings of gadgets in those formats, and so if this is something that you're concerned about, making sure you have archived, searchable copies of everything. A lot of businesses do that sort of thing where they export everything to PDF or some other format periodically. We obviously can't control what the gadget developers do in terms of are they going to keep their gadgets around, that sort of thing. But the other thing that we're looking for, and I'm only assuming this question is geared towards business usage. For businesses, a lot of times what they'll tend to do is they'll tend to make internal versions of gadgets specifically for that reason, so that they don't have to worry about if something changes on the outside.
Any more live questions, or we can take another one from Moderator? All right. What plans are there for getting more people interested in using Wave?
So I guess we've done probably the biggest thing we could do along those lines today by just opening it up for everyone. I think, and this would be obvious, that just the barriers that we actually put in there on purpose to make it hard for people to get in there. Remember 6 months ago, you remember how Wave was like. At the time, we could actually only scale to about a few 100,000 users. We had 5 million or so people wanting to try it out. So we put in these barriers, and we have just removed them today. So it's a lot easier for you to get your whole team on Wave, to get your friends, your family on Wave. We'll make it even easier in a couple of weeks, where you can just throw an email address on a particular Wave. They'll get a link to that Wave, and they can click it, and they'll look at I don't know if you caught that in the keynote, but there's a UI now for Wave where you just see that single Wave. So it's a lot less daunting for a new user to look at. But really, a thing we have definitely learned, and you guys will have felt this too during this invitation-only preview period, is that we need to do a lot more work, help people understand what Wave is and what it's good for and how to use it and so on. And part of that is just explanation, right? When we showed Wave first, we showed this very, very long demo of how Wave might one day in the future play a role in a lot of different contexts. And we put it out there, and we have found that very much the sweet spot, the early use cases that are emerging for Waves are all about groups collaborating on their project. And so we can now in a much more focused way, make those kinds of usage scenarios work really well. And that's what we've been doing for the past couple of months. And the reason we're choosing to open it up at this point is that increasingly we're hearing from people that, wow, I was kicking its tires a while ago, it looked interesting, but now it's actually starting to get good enough to get real work done. The other obvious answer to the question is that we're going to try and help you guys build really cool stuff with Waves, which will get more people interested in using Waves. I think, for example, that if the embed API takes off and people start stumbling over Waves all around the web and seeing this live and incredibly rich engagement with each other, then that in itself will draw more people to Wave. It was something we observed with Maps, which a lot of us worked on Maps before. We think that most users actually saw their first Google Maps on some other site that had embedded a map rather than going to maps.google.com.
I think another thing that we did was add the templates. Because one of the big things was that users, once they actually had people on Wave, they didn't actually know what to do with Wave, because it would, maybe we weren't clear in the beginning, or we didn't know ourselves what it was great for, right? So once we figured it out, we created these templates. So now when you sign into Wave, you'll see 6 templates on the side that's like new document, new brainstorming, new task tracking, new event planning. And those are some of the people's favorite use cases for Wave. And then, somebody signs in, they see that, and before maybe they didn't know what exactly to do with maybe they're just chatting. But now they think, oh, I could use this to track my meeting notes, right? So I think that templates maybe are going a way towards educating users and getting them thinking that this is something they can actually use and want to use.
And it's sort of a tangent, but I think it's important on that is we want to make those templates customizable. So today it's the 6 we pick, But our team does all of our work inside of Wave, and we have a UX review template and a production release candidate template, and all these different templates we copy over and over again, and we want to put those right on the blank Wave panel so we can easily initiate them. And we also want to let people hook in their favorite extensions, so if they just always want to initiate a Wave with a certain extension, they can do that easily. So I just wanted to highlight that because we think the templates we've put there are a basic start, and they're helping people figure out what to do when they get in Wave. But for power users, we want to make them more customizable.
Please.
Hi, Jared from Wayfind. It's really, really awesome to see that you've opened it up to everybody. That was always my issue, was I want to have a Wave, but there's 2 people that don't use it, and that's that because we're doing a live meeting. But I think that Wave has an incredible potential for changing the workflow in organizations. It's neat the way it's sort of spread through Google and Teams, and I think that it has that potential to do that, just in general. But I don't think that the initial experience, even with templates and with a couple initial waves that you get, is enough. Because I think most Google products kind of take an existing metaphor like email or maps or whatever it happens to be, and they sort of change it a little bit, but you sort of have a paradigm behind you. Whereas Wave, you could sort of say that about Wiki, but it's combining a lot of things. So I'm curious what you're looking to do to maybe break outside of some of the way Google approaches things in terms of how you create that initial experience. Like if you think of a traditional web app like I might create or someone in this room creates, they probably do things where they kind of get a little bit more in the user's face and say, do this first, or invite these people first, or just things that you could do that I think really educate the user about how their workflow can change, the potential benefits that go beyond templates and pure text, and even just some of the videos that you did that you're about to answer this question. So I'm just curious what you're going to do to make that experience educate on workflow, because I think it could be wonderful.
So I think you actually did a really good job of describing in some of the things we're looking towards doing. Because we see that people are using Wave in sort of small groups to get things done, a lot of what this means really is workflows. But what kind of happens with workflows is you have some people, and I suspect many of you in this room, who see something new and powerful and sort of broad that you can do a lot of things with, and are able to very quickly imagine what you can do with it and then start making that happen. There's the flip side. There's a lot of people who, when they see something like that, they're frightened. And they're like, this is something new, I don't get it, I don't want to get it, I don't want to have to learn something new. And so what we're trying to do is put the tools in the hands of the people like you who understand what it is and have a vision for what it is, to draw those people in and put more things in their face. And this is how Steph had referred to some of the templates to be able to create things for them, but even more so allowing, so one of the things we are starting to put a lot more work into is group support. So that you can have full groups using Wave, and allowing the person who sets that group up to really tailor the experience for those users a little more and kind of get them started and get them on board. Because I think we can do a lot of things to explain sort of Wave in general to people, but I think the key really is the people who are heading up those workflows and projects and groups to be able to sort of set it up for the people to make it more meaningful to them directly.
Well, just as a thought, I mean, I feel like you have obviously a pretty large group of intelligent people, and you have the ability to really change workflow. And I would consider things like looking how from a machine learning perspective. I know you guys have a whole NLP team with Casey and all those people. Like to look at what people are doing and do something reactive in response to that through some sort of drip sequence of email. The idea of, I know that Google does a really good job of sort of getting out of people's way, but I feel like Wave really can be instrumental in changing people's behavior in a way that really reduces redundancy in organizations and creates knowledge. And I think you could do that through drip sequences in terms of education over time, or also through just figuring out kind of some patterns in how they're using it, and then doing education in response to that. It's just different than other Google products, and you could do that.
I think you're absolutely right, and it is definitely an area where still we can. Even though we're a little bit better than in the past. I don't know if you saw this, but just this morning we added 3 little tutorials to that saying welcome panel. If you click one of them, there's a link below the templates. If you click it, it kind of unfolds. And then you click a tutorial, you get a UI where you just have a single wave that we've pre-populated, and then a bunch of simple steps you can execute over on the left. It's still all very static content. We are actually working on, I don't know if I'm supposed to tell you what we're working on in this space, but we're working on a robot, of course, that we might actually name it Dr. Wave or some such thing. that can take a user through, okay, now do this, and the robot can actually then see if the user does it, gives hint, and so on. It's
Clippy?
Yeah, Clippy, oh, damn it. Damn it. Oh, it looks like you're writing to, I don't know.
The human Dr. Wave is getting tired.
Okay, I wanted to just say one more thing in the spirit of kind of helping people be smarter or work smarter, and Casey and the NLP team, I think one area we've barely scratched the surface is the inbox and showing people what's happening in the inbox and what's interesting to them. It's very basic and it's based on time. And I don't want anyone here to think we think that's sufficient. Like we know there's information overload, and that was part of the problem in the early days of Wave when public waves went crazy and every public wave you touched showed up in your inbox. So we want to do much smarter things, because if I'm explicitly on a wave, it matters more to me than something I'm on because of a group. If somebody replied to or edited something I wrote, it's more important to me than other things. If somebody put an @ in front of my username in a Twitter-like style, it's probably directed at me in some way. And so we just want to kind of apply some of the genius engineering on this team into kind of really presenting you with the information you care most about and in interesting ways.
Thank you for the discussion. So the next question we'll grab from Moderator. Will Gtalk be updated to have a new Wave notifier, or have currently online Wave users added to the contact list?
This is a good idea. Let's do that.
Okay. Years?
Weeks? Months? The notifier. I'm just joking. We obviously haven't built it yet, but I think it's a good idea, and we should probably figure out how to make it so Wave's integrated with the Gtalk.
I want Gtalk in Wave.
Okay.
Good idea. Live question.
Daniel Greverson, you talked about this group collaboration, and for apps, currently it's not possible. I'm testing out apps on my domain as a part of the preview. It seems it's not possible to send waves to groups, or not to other domains hosted at this domain. So if I have one domain, I cannot send wave to all the other domains that I'm hosting there.
So the way it should work is that if you, I'll talk to him afterwards. The way it should work is that as you can add any, if you have a domain turned on for Wave, you can choose to have it open or closed. If it's closed, it means you can only your users can only Wave within their own domain. And this is, a lot of people have asked for this specifically, both in education to protect students, that sort of thing, and also in businesses to just make sure they're not sort of oversharing. The way it should work, though, is also if your domain is open, you should be able to add anyone outside your domain to waves, and it'll show you at the top of the wave that someone from outside your domain is on that wave. If that's not what you're seeing, let's talk afterwards. But
it works that way, but if I'm outside the wave and add a group, that's not possible.
Oh, so you're talking about groups, so being able to add groups.
But that's probably what you're also working on with the group experience and whatever.
So there's a number of things we're working on with the group experience. The very first thing we're working on is just being able to follow a group so that waves to those groups go to your inbox. There also is an interaction between groups in your domain versus sort of public groups and who can be added to those. That there's kind of a large number of settings that we're kind of working through to make sure all of that's working smoothly. But as I said, we're putting a lot more energy now into improving the group support, because this really is sort of a core part of the Wave experience for a lot of people.
Thank you.
So next question from Moderator here is speed, performance. What are we doing about speed and performance? What are our goals?
So speed and performance, it has always been a focus of ours, will continue to be a focus of ours. I don't know if you saw the graph that flashed by, but sort of roughly speaking, speed is about an order of magnitude better now than 6 months ago. Stability, closer to 2 orders of magnitude better. We measure it with metrics like crashes, like how many sessions end with the thing crashing, right? And it used to be actual in whole percents, and it's now down to something like 0.1%. My hope aspirations is that we'll do another order of magnitude change over the next 6 months to a year. So it starts getting hard. One thing we had a real problem with earlier was the speed of opening large waves. It's very simple because we loaded the whole thing into memory. We rendered the entire wave in the browser as DOM, which was very slow. And so just recently, we made it so that we only render the part of the wave that you're actually looking at. Sort of an obvious thing to do, but it was trickier than we thought because it's hard to predict how tall each part of the wave is going to be until you render them. And next thing that we're working on is, so currently when a wave gets loaded into the browser, it's in a format that's specifically tailored to making collaborative editing work. And then in the browser, we convert that to HTML to actually show you, and we build all of the data structures to manage the concurrent editing. And so at some point, we'll make it so that the server produces the HTML, and we only show the HTML when you load a wave, and then we only build the collaborative editing data structures if you actually need them. Again, a super obvious thing to do, but quite a lot of work in practice. But I think it's possible to achieve another order of magnitude speed improvement there for sizable waves.
And there's actually a talk about, in the Gwt track, actually, about how Wave has helped sort of work through how you can make big applications fast with Gwt. So check the schedule for that.
Once again, about Gadget's API. What about merging Gadget states and callback? State is changed. Now I know the only state is changed, and I know what is changed. And I'm doing Gadgets as hold a big document, build a hierarchy tree, rather big. And it takes a lot just to merge it, to diff it. And now I'm using the approach that I store the document as a sequence of comments. It is good for merging, but it takes now a lot of time to load the ready document. So what are your plans? What are your advices?
So basically you want to have a diff?
Yeah, I would like to have a diff. What have changed in the state?
Yeah, that seems very reasonable.
Okay. Months? Weeks?
No, in a similar vein, one thing that we have been wanting for a long time is to actually give you a diff on open, so that when when the user comes back to the gadget, your gadget gets a diff on open state and can show the user what has changed since he last time looked. Well.
Vadim is sitting right there, and he's a gadgets engineer, so you should go give him some money.
He said weeks?
He said weeks.
He said weeks.
Yeah.
Woo! Oh, Vadim.
We'll grab a question from
Open the
Moderator.
laptop.
Yeah, so last year you previewed Rosie with Google Wave. Wondering about some plans for when Rosie may be available in the extensions gallery.
A favorite question of mine. Yeah, so Rosie was actually built by someone from the Google machine translation tool, which is not surprising. And I am not gonna, so this is not someone who works on my team, so it's doubly hard to predict when it's gonna be, but I would hope we're talking months here. One of my favorite robots ever.
Please.
Thank you, Jérôme. I have a question about wave organizations. Is it something planned to have a less wave viewable at the same time? I have an idea. It's something that would be a mind map, but with waves as nodes. That would be something very useful if you work on very large projects that are to be discussed by several groups of people, maybe at the same time, of course, but say the 100 person are not to be made as a recipients of one wave.
So I suppose you could build something like that using embedded waves.
Sorry, using what?
Using embedded waves.
Embedded waves, yeah. Okay.
So if I understand the question, though, what you're saying is you want to build something mind map like each node has all the wave-like properties to it. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, that's my idea.
So Doodad is what it seems like he's kind of aiming towards.
I got a different interpretation entirely.
We'll discuss it. No.
Well, because remember at one point, wanting to actually visualize your nodes as a map and seeing the connections between them. Is that?
Okay.
We need a whiteboard. That's what we really need.
I'd also like to say that the client that we're releasing, that source code can be taken and turned into something like that. So if you have an entirely different rendering engine and you want to embed blips or waves in a mind map, we'd love to see it.
Yeah, I'd like to. So just to make it, I try to make it clearer. Say someone is creating a wave, a starting wave for a big project that involves hundreds of people in a company of thousands of people. Okay, say it's a car. One wave, a node of the mind map would be about the engine, another about the wheels, okay, and so on.
Yeah, so I think that's about connecting waves together semantically, so I was right.
Pamela was right.
So right now there are robots that people are building to do very basic structures within Wave, like having, there's tasky, doing subtasks and subtasks of that, which is like a tree. You're probably looking for something a little bit more, flexible. So I think we've thought about that.
You can also easily do wiki-like linking between waves, which is what we do internally. So easily, so there's a button linked to this wave. You can use that, or you can drag from the digest from your search panel the wave digest onto a different wave, and you have a link to it. And if you interlink them, just like.
But that being said, being able to visualize that sort of wiki-like structure easily is I think a really interesting idea.
So in my talk that you all should visit this afternoon, I'll show some code on a Wiki Robot that I've been working on. And of course that thing only allows you to create new waves based on selecting a piece of text, and then you click a button and it creates a wave with that thing, so it helps you set up that wiki. But it would be an awesome thing to have that same robot then maybe maintain one wave with the overall structure of what you have built, and then you get, I think, somewhat close to what you're getting at.
And in Alan and my talk tomorrow.
No, Douwe's talk is at 3 o'clock today.
Yeah. Yeah, but just part of the thing we're going to be showing is exactly the same sort of thing, but with also the ability to have robots cross-updating between these waves and these nodes. Because I think that's one of the things that we get asked about all the time is it's really interesting to have sort of a wiki, kind of a mesh of waves, but what you want to be able to do is have the information flowing between them, and this is something that the robots the Active Robot API really enables, and I think Pamela mentioned Tasky, which does this as well. So I think there's a really interesting aspect there too.
Thank you. Do you mind if I have another question?
Sure, go ahead.
A question about groups. I'm working on something that could give restricted rights to users. Okay, say I have a wave with only 2 groups as recipients, and one group is read-only and the other has full access. How can I know the groups of the user that is interacting with the wave?
So I think your question is how do you know which group the user is getting the access through? Is that essentially?
Yeah.
So we don't really, if you're looking to find out stuff about, what group somebody is in or why it is they're able to view a wave or edit a wave, there's really nothing like that. And there's not really a groups API for normal groups. There is somewhat of an API for Google Apps groups, a little bit. But usually when people are doing that, I tell them to create their own concept of groups, using App Engine, or I guess your own server now. So that you really have full access to the data.
Robots can configure read-only and full access.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So one of the things that will happen is if you have access through both of those groups, you'll get access to the highest level. You'll get the highest level of access that you get. So I guess there's also a question. It sounds like you want to know which group it's coming from for another reason, but the access levels are controlled by whatever group gives you access to the wave, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. But my point was more about one user belonging to one group in the two groups that are recipients of the wave. And so when the robot reacts to the user interaction, I would like to know which group does he belong to.
Yeah,
and
I would
what are his rights?
I would keep your own list of groups and check it. Have your robot check it. Its own data store.
Yeah, though in this situation, so the user gets added to the wave by at that point. So you can just check what the access right to the user has, because that will be inherited from the group, right? So you have one group is read only. So if the user accesses, well, actually, if it's read only, you can't do anything.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah.
So actually, we're going to try and wrap things up a few minutes early, given the crazy schedule changes that happened with the keynote. But we'll be happy to hang out here and ask questions more sort of live in person, or rather one-on-one in person, for a little bit. And thank you so much for coming. We got 3 wave sessions today, and 3 wave sessions tomorrow, and then there's a variety of office hours and such.
Yeah, we'll stay up here and answer questions. Just to, if you want to remember who we are, Dan knows everything about platform and federation, enterprise, whatever we do. Enterprise, developer relations, platform, and then protocol. So we'll stay up here for a few minutes and come talk to us, especially this gentleman who has some more ideas. Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much for all your work with Wave.